ordinary meeting. So, Marcus, do you want to just give us any points? We've done a bit of reading.
Certainly.
What would you like?
Thank you, Chair, for considering the supplementary paper as the last minute addition. Effectively, the currently up for consultation is the changes to the Emergency Management Act through a bill. Submissions close this Sunday the 15th, so this is the only opportunity to get through the full council meeting. And we've been working to get the fulsome submission compiled this last week since our workshop on the 28th. So appreciate the time taken to read through. I'll talk through some of the key submission topics and highlight the parts for our councillors and you can for any questions or comments as we work our way through. So first significant section is around essential infrastructure. What we want to make sure is that the essential infrastructure definition captures flood protection works, including flood banks, but also I guess there's that recognition that we've sort of talked about that a little bit before. It's not just the flood banks that are the infrastructure for flooding, it's also the floodplain between the river and the bank. There's also part of that infrastructure works. So trying to make sure that that's adequately reflected through that process and provided for in the future.
When you say that comment, you're talking about the berm area. When you're talking about parts of infrastructure like edge protection and stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Effectively, all of those aspects that are part of our flood work. So, yeah, there's the width of how far the banks are apart is about the volume of water that can travel down. So it's not just the bank that's part of that infrastructure, it's actually the volume of water that can shift down the floodway is all part of how the system is designed. So we don't want to, I guess, lose traction on some of those issues around the management of areas within the floodplain that floods is between the banks. So,
Looking at the berm area normally, but it's can be large chunks of people's property.
Just a question around that.
Well, I was wanting to back up a wee bit, if that's all right.
I'm just wondering, how do you want to work through this, Marcus?
just technical word is using the flood protection network is probably a better definition. So that's
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
Just one, John's obviously got a question from the front page. How do you want to work through this? Do you want to give us a rundown then questions? Come back to questions. I'm just trying to work out what the easiest way. Don't be going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, that's fine.
John, read the question then.
Sorry, just paragraph 3, animal welfare gives clearly authority to prevent unnecessary suffering due to emergencies. I think we've had a situation that's exposed the grey lines of business ownership responsibilities, animal welfare. I'm a little bit cautious around that statement. So what is the clarity on that? Is this privately owned animals or is it?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
So through you, Chair, in the Emergency Management Act presently makes the prioritisation around how you work through decisions in a state of emergency. So risk to life is first, as risk to property is second, and then it's animals is the third priority in the way the hierarchy sits. So immediate attention goes to preserving life, protect the property, and then it's into animals thereafter. So that's, I guess, where that comes from. So some of the changes basically trying to provide federal authority to prevent unnecessary suffering for animals, cartel, whether it's a pet or an animal or it's wildlife or all those different aspects around. That's how you start making those decisions depending on the context of the emergency. Depending on how much time you've got, depending on the nature of the risk and how much resources you've got available, you work through that prioritisation process.
I think recent events red flagged. It's a grey area that can suck a lot of resources. So how do we? Yeah, it's just a flag I want to just to make noted that clarity I think is really required.
What John's trying to say, he's just told me, that basically, do we as an environmental organisation need to take that under our wings? EMS, sorry.
Through you, Chair, this is primarily the Southland. We have a regional approach or a joint service for emergency management. Southland that delivers the emergency functions and the decision making around the animal part is very much on as the emergency develops. So if you get a flood coming down the catchment, then you can warn all of the property owners that are in that catchment. Go, this is the time that the flood comes down. If you've got stock within the flood network area, then you've got the ability to start mobilising and taking action to shift your tractor or your four-wheeler if it's on the wrong side of the flood bank or the stock to get it into a better space. So depending on how the natural hazard evolves, you prioritise the people in evacuating townships as need be and managing property, and then people start trying to make their own decisions around how they manage their own stock and through a emergency management process we assist to the best ability we can, but we try.
It just feels like an EPI thing, that's all. Yeah, to me, it just feels like an EPI thing.
Right, I agree. David,
Yeah, I'm just going to add, the Taramara ponding area is a good example of when you get a flood. You could say, don't worry about the animals, but the animals got nowhere to go and they go onto the road. That's what happens because the property is completely under. So it's not so much resourcing, it's having a thought around that so that you just don't end up with, bureaucracy doesn't get in the way of what would be a common sense outcome just to save the animals for a few years, And secondly, and I'm not sure if this is relevant, but in the North Island there was a police event once where the guy running around with a rifle and there were cows in the cow shed left unmulched, and even though the thing had passed, no one was allowed it. And so around there, when I was involved in the feds, we were involved in trying to make sure that the animal welfare thing was dealt with at some stage rather than forgotten.
Is it not EPI?
What's that?
Is that not EPI's responsibility? I thought that.
Well, whoever it was police on the day because police wouldn't let you through because they just said no to anything. So some of these things crop up, and I understand what you're saying about resourcing, but I'm just saying some of these animal welfare issues, it just to be on the radar so that people are thinking about it.
Can I get a point of clarification? Is MPI involved in the emergency management group?
Yes, very much are they involved.
There's where it should sit.
Lucy, do you want to just clarify that? Sorry.
Through you, Chair. So animal welfare is a emergency response role, sits with MPI. So if this was an animal welfare issue, then MPI are the lead agency. What the bill's trying to do is create clarity and additional powers for animals that might be not thinking about cattle necessarily, but more broadly, if there is an animal in need, who's responsible for actually intervening in that situation. So it's about clarifying those roles and responsibilities so that there isn't grey area. That's what they're trying to do.
Okay, trying to fix the problem. Roger, did you have a question?
Yes, on bullet 3 of number 3. So yes, supporting the definition, the definition of essential infrastructure being broadened to include the flood infrastructure, and I just wanted to confirm that the reference there to lifeline utilities was a reference to perhaps communications and power, but after the recent event, that communications infrastructure is essential to being able to coordinate a response. And so I just wondered if the communication infrastructure is strongly enough emphasised actually in that essential infrastructure.
Yeah, well, through you, Jill, we believe it is, and I just recommend that the lifeline, part of that lifeline piece is the central infrastructure is also flood banks and natural hazard network as well. So I believe it is captured through the definition. We'll double make sure that is.
All good. Lyndall?
Thanks, Chairman. Just to go back to the animal welfare issue, Lucy said it far more eloquently than I. Just to remind us that this is a national bill that we are discussing, and that the clear authority that we are requesting is hopefully will exactly deal with some of those issues, notwithstanding that lots of the communities of interest have animals and beloved pets and lifeline animals actually that need to be considered. My second point is on that essential infrastructure. Paragraph 7, which I don't have a problem with exactly.
Number 7.
Paragraph 7.
Good, 7.
I would ask that the first sentence on page, whatever, the next page after 7, says for Southland communities which are often widespread.
Not just rural.
Yeah. But also, and I'm not sure which is the best way to do this, but the single lifeline issue is a problem for the towns and cities equally. If we get cut off at Gore because there's an issue with the bridge, then the whole of Southland is cut off, pretty much. So I'm not sure how best to word that, whether it needs its own paragraph, but I certainly think that we need to emphasise that towns and cities are just as vulnerable because we have very few lifelines into them anyway. Not diminishing the fact that the rural communities are isolated on a daily basis, and I don't mean to diminish that, so I just think we should word that carefully, because as we know, when the Ashburton Bridge goes out, you don't get bread and milk in Invercargill.
We'll need to come across the Pyramid Bridge, don't we?
It's still one way though, isn't
We've
it?
got Morris and then Paul, so.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think there's a bit of a difficulty here trying to define specifically what an essential infrastructure is. In the bill at the moment, at 7.1, it says, in this act, essential infrastructure means the infrastructure components that are necessary to deliver an essential service. It doesn't talk about roads or bridges or anything like that. It just says it's a component that's necessary to deliver an essential service. And I don't know if there's anywhere in the bill, I can't find it, but I've been looking for it on that specifies particular things like roads or bridges or something. So if we're going to ask them to define stop links as a particular thing, then we might be missing out a whole lot of other stuff as well. And I think what they're trying to do here is to cover everything basically by saying that it's something that's necessary to deliver an essential service, and the essential service obviously is keeping people out of budget. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to the recommendation to ask for it to be explicitly included, but the explanation might be that, we'd have to describe a whole lot of things as well. That might be kind of around. Might be general rather than specific. You see what I mean?
Yep.
Is there a problem?
Yeah, through you, Chair, that's good observation, and I guess we can have a look and see, if it's, I guess, probably articulating in our view that the flood network is in our view, where that sort of sits in terms of part of that definition, as opposed to, a very specific definition which may not cover all aspects and may need a whole lot of redrafting at the central government level. So, I guess it's probably worthwhile clarifying that in our view, the essential infrastructure includes the flood network.
I'm not opposed to saying that. I was just thinking that you might be successful. I might say, well, we know that because it's an essential service, but it would be helpful perhaps to have that there's something.
Okay. So you feel for things. Paul, then you, and then we might keep moving.
No, thank you. I sort of agree with where Lynn was coming from. I'm not wholly agreeing with Morris. So, the criteria of flood infrastructure is an essential. It's an essential infrastructure. It has to be included as that. And we always talk about protection up the river, protects everyone down the river. So we should realistically get rid of the rural word, because we're talking about communities, and we're talking about the region, and we're talking about our people. So I just think it's just,
I agree with where you're coming from. Just not isolating one group over another group, but definitely including flow infrastructure as essential infrastructure.
Yeah, just, sorry, Paul, I support what Morris is saying, because considering this is an emergency management bill that we're talking about, and those flood banks are a responsibility of Environment Southland. So are we saying that emergency management has oversight over what we do as Environment Southland? Because effectively the bill, if we're putting flood banks as an, and they are incredibly important infrastructure under this bill, then actually emergency management as an organisation actually have a responsibility around making sure the Environment Southland is maintaining and keeping that infrastructure up to scratch. That would be my take on what potentially we're looking at.
Yeah, through you, Chair, effectively the requirement to look after the infrastructure still sits with the regional council, but I guess the way the bill's sort of word is recognising that there's certain infrastructure that is important that needs status through the process. So when you're making decisions that you can go, oh, okay, we need to allocate sufficient resource to make sure these lifeline utilities or the
yeah, no, I understand that, Marcus, but it's that interplay between the two. So yeah, perhaps I can make yeah.
Okay.
Chair, what's the implication of the of essential infrastructure? What's it mean? It seems as if essential.
Yes, so effectively it delivers the important needs of the region, and effectively we're seeking clarification for, it's in paragraph 8, explicit recognition of flood banks as essential infrastructure would deliver several important benefits, would include clarifying council's responsibilities and powers, managing, maintaining, and upgrading these assets, reducing ambiguity during emergency responses and recovery, particularly rapid access to land, emergency works, or prioritised repair as required. It also strengthens the basis for national resilience funding. So I guess all of that sort of emphasis helps us continue to do the regional council role in this emergency management means of the readiness, the 4 Rs, the readiness.
Through your chair, it also it's one of the reasons we got CANAR funding, and the whole flood program came out was because of it's seen as essential infrastructure. So
yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you.
Through the chair, moving into second section, so group officers and group managers. So effectively the bill understates the critical role that group officers and managers play in enabling the emergency management system to function effectively at a regional level, and effectively the administrative support is critical for analysis and planning coordinated operational functions needed for emergency management. So effectively we want to recognise or define the roles and responsibilities at a minimum capability and expectations for group officers and group managers through the mandated national guidance or standards reflecting their professional and technical functions, and recognise group officers as professional emergency management units rather than administrative support roles. So trying to elevate their status to make sure that there's their work is recognised as part of that process. The next section was around iwi Māori participation. So effectively we're seeking to strengthen clause 39 to F around appointing individuals able to reflect local perspectives of iwi or Maori is not clear and risks enabling a representation that does not reflect recognised mana whenua equality. So effectively iwi and Runanga already contribute significantly to emergency management planning, response and community resilience in practice. The bill does not materially strengthen that statutory basis for the involvement. So I guess through this section, we're looking to provide practical mechanisms and resourcing to support strong, consistent iwi partnership ensuring governance representation reflects mana whenua authority and expertise. Amend that clause to ensure representation is grounded in mana whenua authority rather than a broader and less precise local perspectives of Maori. Include greater legislative expectations for the protection of Tonga Maori and early planning processes that support culturally appropriate emergency responses, and recognise the role of marae in supporting local community response and welfare during emergencies, ensure emergency management arrangements enable marae such as Mirihuku to operate effectively in its capacity without compromising their ability to serve the communities. So it's basically recognising the value they Maori and iwi bring to emergency management, but making sure that it's actually a local mana whenua representative rather than a representative from potentially elsewhere in the region. Building capacity where we can and empowering our locals.
Lyndall?
Just kind of side question. Would this strengthen, given that some of our local marae are vulnerable to the changing climate, would strengthening this here reinforce their argument for relocation because they would be considered more officially as an emergency management centre, an emergency centre. Sorry, kind of a little bit off piece, but I'm just wondering if it will help in their conversation. What are the implications?
Sorry, not sure.
So that could be any community.
Yeah, but if I'm thinking of Colac Bay, particularly, or do you need to relocate the marae if they're more formally recognised as a place of value in this way? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, sorry, you're talking about a response like in the heat of the moment when you're in a state of emergency declared.
Long term wise, some of them need to shift, right?
But yeah, I guess it recognises that marae provide an important function as a community hub during emergencies, so making sure that they're resilient and built in the right locations to be effective when the need arises.
Yeah, cool, thank you.
Good.
Next section, management of undeclared emergencies and liability settings. So effectively in Southland, we've caught up with these floods, which are particularly slow developing, slow building events that require early monitoring and technical assessments and interagency coordination before a declaration is made. So effectively there's quite a bit of uncertainty how the costs of early monitoring, coordination and preventative actions undertaken during undeclared emergencies should be managed. And so we're seeking further clarity to assist in managing those early stages where staff and partners are all working together and just getting clear expectations around health and safety as well. So recommendations there at the bottom of that page and onto the next page around clarifying expectations, ensuring legislative framework appropriately recognises and supports emergency management mandate, provide clear guidance around activities undertaken by councils, clarify how reasonable early stage activities undertaken by councils during undeclared emergencies may be funded or recovered to avoid uncertainty for councils and communities, and strengthen national guidance so that early stage emergency management activities are consistent, proportionate and aligned with the overall intent of the bill.
David?
So is that around, as something's emerging, you see a problem and you have to wait for it to be declared before you can do something rather than just get on with it? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and generally in practice, the flood resilience team, the monitoring and all the gauging that goes on in the science team are already out there doing it. So they're monitoring the rainfall, they're understanding the scenarios and understand the thresholds around when we start doing that work. It's just trying to recognise that there's a lot of coordination already occurs between the councils around infrastructure and already starting to get into and managing the flood warning system before you actually tip over into an emergency threshold.
I have come across that when an event starting, there's often that lag, we're just waiting for it to clear the emergency, which is time and lost time in dealing with stuff. So that's to help that as well.
Yeah, and just to try and assist with the building the collaboration and consistency and working. Like we have pretty good relationships in Southland for these sorts of issues. So in practice it works pretty well. But I guess it's making sure that it doesn't get any worse through the clarity in the bill. That we want to make sure that we still have that assistance and be able to work a coordinated approach before you get into that declared state.
So Morris and Roger.
You use the term undeclared emergencies there. What is an undeclared emergency? Does it have status under this Act?
Well, effectively, I guess it's in that pre-emergency space. So,
Okay.
It's an emergency.
It's not something
so it's
else.
emergency, but it hasn't hit the threshold for being able to declare yet.
Is that the best word for that?
Maybe emerging.
Emerging, yeah.
Emerging.
Emergency, it's emergency, but it's undeclared emergency. Doesn't sound like an emergency. So
We'll see if we can find a better phrasing for that.
Roger.
Oh, that's pretty much addressed what I was going to talk about. An undeclared emergency to me suggests that there's an emergency that hasn't been identified or hasn't been
Failure.
effectively responded to. So I think, I think we've seen and it's clear that preemptive declarations of states of emergency are really valuable for sending a clear signal strongly and quickly to people to take action and enabling the access to the resources needed to provide a strong response and protect communities quickly. And like declaring them the night before in some of the northern areas recently, I think we need to be using that as a tool. So if that's what we're talking about, then we should talk about that sort of in a different way rather than saying it's an undeclared emergency, because to me that's almost a retrospective identification if we should have done something but we didn't.
Maybe a emerging event of potential significance or something like that. Could be a bit of a phrase.
So we do see. Sorry.
Got Jeff Lindell and then
I was going
Paul.
to say something similar to you, Roger, too. Is the provision there, what I'd like to ask, for declaring an emergency a bit earlier? Because I know on the Mataura River upper reaches, if it gets to 3 metres at Athol, it probably closes the road there, and you can be rest assured that there's a big wall of water coming down. It will be an emergency declared. And so I think it's about declaring that emergency and preempting a really bad event.
Yeah, and through your chair, the value of the science and the monitoring equipment is hugely valuable to that extent, because you can see the rain still falling, and you can see the forecast still coming, and you can see it still mounting. So yeah, the systems we've got are pretty significant to be able to identify the potential and understand the risk. There's a pretty impressive hydrology team that have got a good knowledge and background in that space.
Yeah, Lindell and Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. 2 things. There's a continuum, when we, in all of this, it's not suddenly it's an emergency. I don't know how you work that into the pre-declaration part of it, but it's a continuum of circumstances. The other thing I would just remind us all is that if you declare an emergency, that shifts the seat of power considerably. So just wanted to remind us of that, because if you declare an emergency, then different people become in charge of making the decisions. Am I right? So just be mindful.
Paul.
I mean, I'm just looking back at situations where we've had this sort of thing happening, and I don't think there's much of an issue or change. I can remember that a few months ago with the storm coming into Brisbane. There was 3 days of notifications and warnings prior to that, and everyone was saying the winds are coming. When it did come, thankfully they have been warning me for 3 or 4 days. The imminent idea that something is coming doesn't mean what do you sit there and say, no, we won't do it? Well, they're going to find out. So it's already in place now in reality. It's just emphasising it a bit more, I would say. I can't see an issue.
Good. We'll keep moving.
Into the last section, so implementation resourcing requirements. So a few concerns in here about the additional costs potential for resourcing this piece of work. So effectively, there's some implementation challenges with region-specific factors, including we've got a large geographic area, dispersed communities, and potential for isolation. Key transport routes or key dependencies are lost, and the region relies heavily on community-led readiness and community response groups as part of the response. There's a significant implementation risk that if emergency management is funded entirely by local government, it places basically additional unsustainable, untenable level of funding on local government to continue maintaining it. So I guess without adequate staffing and training in infrastructure readiness and community engagement goals, the aspirations of the bill potentially may not be able to be achieved. So we've tried to capture that in the recommendations by providing early practical national guidance to support implementation, including key time frames, transitional expectations, and supporting material to assist councils and communities. Ensure implementation is supported by appropriate resourcing, recognising additional responsibilities placed on regional councils, iwi partners, and community-based response structures across Southland. Ensure the emergency management system is supported by sustainable and secure funding framework, recognising the bill places an acceptable and attainable level of additional funding burden on local government, and that these functions must be funded by central government rather than relying on constrained local government revenue or any future limits on rating capacity. So try to capture, I guess, the implementation cost of providing for our communities, and we're relying solely on grants mechanism to do everything well.
Through Chair, just adding to Marcus's comments, I think the cost to local government is about $82 million over 4 years for establishing the system. So I think it works out at about $1 million per region, if you like, a sort of equivalent EMS type cost. So reasonably significant. So I'm very keen that you push back hard on that in a context of rates cap. Yeah, this is. I
think we all agree to that. Here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Rob's just said what I was going to say. None of this is possible without adequate resourcing, and I'm more than comfortable for you to be as forceful as you can in the wording.
Isn't our intention to request that we be heard for all these submissions? It is. Can I make a general comment about submissions, which I think might be helpful? What happens with each of these? They go out, and there could be 1,000 or 2,000 submissions come in, and the bill gets directed to a select committee, and it'll have a report back time, depending on the House's program, of a few weeks to possibly 2 or 3 months. And so if you want to be heard, the first thing is half of those submissions will have, we would like to be heard. So when you say we'd like to be heard, you need to put in one sentence as to why you're unique as a region and why you should be heard, because the chair of the select committee will meet with the clerk of the committee and they will try and get a representative view. So they go firstly to the local government association and they say, oh, well, that's territorial and local authorities represented. So, and then they'll go all around the place. So you need to say why. The second thing is, most of the select committee members confronted with a wall of submissions, and they may be doing 2 bills at once, or 3, and you've got a fair bit of reading to do. So a lot of people rely on the officials to write a précis of what's in them. But what most select committee members will do, will look for an executive summary at the start to say, okay, this is a bit different. Now, I like the way this is laid out with a narrative and then a different font for the recommendations. That's well done. That's good. But I do always suggest to people who are putting in a submission, have an executive summary with some crunchy bits at the start so that there is some interest in what you've actually done.
That's good. Wisdom coming from many years of being involved in this.
Many thousands of submissions.
It's also okay to say the things we like.
Yeah, but it is probably quite a good point.
It
I
happens,
made.
actually.
It's not
Anybody got any necessary questions?
most.
We could. Eric's advice.
Don't want to give you more work.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
want any more work, but
to make sure that, I guess we have the maximum impact, it's valuable time for councillors to get their views down on paper and partake in the democratic process. I was just wondering whether we're strong enough in our recommendations.
Yeah, they're good. Well done.
Ratchet up, just over out the additional costs.
yeah. Yeah.
Very ratchet it up, but that's a widely held view, then, yeah, keen to make sure we repeat that.
Yeah. I think we're all pretty happy, and thanks to the team. You've done a lot of work here, huge amount of work. So that's good. Appreciate that, and listening to our little bits and pieces we like to throw on things. It's all about democracy, isn't it? Right.
Want me to move those?
So we've got two recommendations: receive report and direct staff about the submission. So we're all pretty happy with that. And Lyndall, you're happy to move?
And some minor changes.
Yeah, and offer a few changes. Can we write that in and amend the recommendation?
When we send it.
That. Lyndall, you'll see, moving. You and second it. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Right. Thank you.
Now we've got.
Now we need to move into PX for regions.
Yeah, the general subject matter is to be considered by the public as being excluded, and the reason for this resolution in relation to the matter and the specific grounds for excluding the public as specified by section 48(1) of the Local Government Information and Meetings Act 1987 are: 1. Confirmation of public excluded minutes of ordinary meeting of council, to protect the privacy of natural persons. Section 7(2)(a) to allow council to carry out negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations, without prejudice or disadvantage. Section 7(2)(i) to enable any local authority holding the information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities. Section 7(2)(h) the adoption of the excluded committee resolutions, the Chief Executive's Review Committee on 27th of January 2026. To prevent privacy of natural persons, section 7(2)(a), with the adoption of public excluded committee resolutions for the Integrated Catchment Management Committee on the 28th of January 2026 to maintain legal professional privilege, section 7(2)(g).
I'll move that. David, all in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Move in.
Just give me a second.